This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news compiled in the early hours of Wednesday, the 7th of February. I'm Oliver Conway with a selection of highlights from across the BBC World Service. Coming up, the world's most powerful rocket, Elon Musk's Falcon Heavy, has taken off from Cape Canaveral.
10, 9, 8.
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
So what does this successful launch mean for the space industry? Rescuers in Taiwan are searching a hotel that's leaning at a severe angle after a strong earthquake.
There's not many. Oh my God. This is an aftershock, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're having a few aftershocks. This is maybe our 7th of the hour.
Also in the podcast, Japan's Princess Mako delays her wedding by 2 years. There's been more turbulence on the world's stock markets, but the US Treasury Secretary says there's no need to panic. And
in a huge, brilliantly organised parade, over 600 militants dressed in white held arrows proudly aloft as a symbol of their imprisonment for the cause.
Britain celebrates 100 years since some women were granted the right to vote. More on that later. But first, it's been described as the most powerful rocket operating today, able to carry more than twice the payload of its nearest rival. The Falcon Heavy, brainchild of US entrepreneur Elon Musk, is the first rocket capable of taking humans to the moon since Saturn V in the early 1970s. And on Tuesday, near the end of its launch window, the Falcon Heavy lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida.
10, 9, 8.
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
A short while later, the two side boosters successfully separated and flew back to Earth for simultaneous touchdowns on twin launch pads. I asked our science correspondent Jonathan Amos what this successful launch meant for the modern space race.
It's certainly a big development for rocketry today, that's for sure. As you were saying there, Ollie, twice the performance of any existing rocket and a third of the price, Elon Musk says. And that really blows the competition out of the water in terms of the commercial marketplace and what he's able to sell his services to the big satellite operators. But more than that, the capability of the rocket means that it opens up some really interesting possibilities now for much bigger satellites. If you think about going to Mars, now there's that big rover, isn't there, on the surface of Mars, the Curiosity rover, weighs a ton. It took 3.5 tons of payload to get that ton on the surface of Mars. Well, this rocket can send 16 tons to the surface of Mars. So we can think about much bigger rockets, bigger telescopes, bigger satellites, humans perhaps going around the moon, landing on the moon, maybe sending robots out to Saturn and Jupiter and landing on their moons as well. So, it's a big day, and my imagination is kind of thinking, now, what else can we do?
And just describe for us that choreographed moment when the two boosters landed looking like, I don't know, Thunderbirds or something.
Well, this is the point. This is how Elon Musk makes his rockets much cheaper than everybody else, is because the normal way of launching a rocket is that as you go up, you discard your various stages, as they call them, and they just fall back and they get destroyed. They fall into the ocean. But he's able to bring them back and land them back, either on land, as we saw there, the two coming back together just at the Kennedy Space Center, or on a ship out in the Atlantic Ocean, and then he can reuse them, put them back on the launch pad and fly them again. And very soon he'll be able to fly these boosters, I don't know, maybe 10 times in a row before he retires them and picks up a new one. So that's how you get to much lower cost, and that is going to change very much how we access space and the things that we do in space.
Jonathan Amos. Rescue workers in Taiwan are trying to find survivors trapped inside buildings after a powerful earthquake hit the port city of Hualien. A 10-storey hotel was left tilting at an angle of almost 45 degrees. At least 2 people died in the city, more than 100 others were injured. The 6.4 magnitude quake hit just before midnight on Tuesday. Mobile phone footage showed people running along at the base of the hotel with torches and a ladder trying to help those stuck inside. Well, Zena Starbuck, who was staying at a nearby hostel, spoke to the BBC when there was an aftershock.
There's not many. Oh my God. This is an aftershock, I'm sorry.
Well, my goodness.
Oh my God.
My goodness.
So we're told to just go to the road and stay in the road. But yeah, we're having a few aftershocks. This is maybe our 7th of the hour.
My colleague Julian Marshall got more details from the BBC's Cindy Su in Taiwan.
The rescuers have pulled out alive 149 people. That's quite amazing, given that this earthquake happened at 11:50 p.m. On a Tuesday night. And they're saying that 2 people have been confirmed dead. They're both elderly. One is a 61-year-old and the other one is a 66-year-old. But they don't know exactly how many people are still trapped inside the 7 buildings that have been affected. The buildings have either tilted over or they are partially collapsed. Now, of the building that seems to be the most damaged, that's the hotel, Marshall Hotel, which has about 300 guest rooms. Now, they're saying that fortunately only 3 people are still missing. Most of the others have all come out. And among the missing are 2 of the employees who worked on the first floor, the check-in counter. And these 2 employees are not accounted for. There's also another person in B1 that has not been found. And so B1 and the first floor and the second floor were the 3 floors of this hotel that were crushed when this earthquake happened. Now, the other buildings affected, they seem to have just tilted over, but the rescuers are still trying to find out if anybody is trapped inside.
And do we know whether the emergency services have reached this port city?
Oh, yes, definitely. The firefighters in Hualien City were on the scene quite quickly. And the military also dispatched dozens of soldiers to help in the rescue effort. So what we're seeing is that they're using excavators, ladders, as well as sniffer dogs to try to find survivors inside. They seem to be pulling apart some of the walls and windows to try to see if anyone's inside.
Is this an earthquake-prone region of Taiwan?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Taiwan lies in the Pacific Ring of Fire. And, if you look at earthquake maps, I mean, it's covered by red dots. There, it lies on at the convergence of the Eurasian and the Philippines tectonic plates. In fact, the mountains of Taiwan were caused by the collisions of these 2 tectonic plates. So we get a lot of earthquakes. And the authorities have just told us after this earthquake occurred that since February 4th, we've experienced 96 earthquakes. But since this latest earthquake, we've also experienced several smaller earthquakes. So that figure since February 4th is believed to be well over 100 earthquakes. Now, fortunately, most of them don't cause any damage. But sometimes this one does cause a lot of damage and also deaths. We don't know what the death toll will be from this one, but we do know that earthquakes in Taiwan can be very deadly. In fact, exactly 2 years ago on the same day, February 6, 2016, a 6.4 earthquake struck in southern Taiwan, causing a large apartment block to collapse and killing 117 people.
Cindy Su in Taiwan. Speculation about the future of South Africa's President Jacob Zuma is continuing after unnamed sources told South Africa's Times Live website that he's prepared to quit if the right terms can be negotiated. Earlier, Mr. Zuma's State of the Nation address was postponed, and then an ANC party meeting to discuss his future was put on hold following talks with his would-be successor, Cyril Ramaphosa. Andrew Harding sent this report from Johannesburg.
These are strange, twitchy times for South Africa. No one seems sure if President Zuma is poised to step down at any moment or is playing cannily for more time. The governing ANC has welcomed constructive discussions between Mr. Zuma and the man poised to replace him, the party's new leader, Cyril Ramaphosa. As a result, an emergency party meeting has been abruptly cancelled, along with Thursday's State of the Nation address. Quite where that leaves the party, the president and the nation remains unclear. Mr. Zuma's critics believe he has run out of time and options. But he is a formidable political survivor, skilled at exploiting deep divisions within the ANC. The next step could be a sudden breakthrough or a long, uncomfortable deadlock.
Andrew Harding reporting. Last year, almost 1.5 million people visited the tropical island nation of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. But the political crisis there is now so severe that several countries, including the US and China, have urged their citizens not to travel to the archipelago. India has been asked to resolve the crisis after President Abdullah Yameen of the Maldives declared a state of emergency and sacked the head of the Supreme Court. For the moment, though, India has simply said it is disturbed by the latest events. But will that remain its position? A question Julian Marshall put to Dr. Champa Patel, head of the Asia programme at the Chatham House think tank in London.
I think it depends how events will, unfold over the next few days. On the one hand, it go against India's long-standing policy not to interfere in other states' affairs. But it has done so previously in the Maldives. So in 1998, it did launch an operation called Operation Cactus to foil a coup by mercenaries to restore the government of the then President Abdul Gayoom. So it has intervened before, and the main opposition at the moment, which holds a majority in parliament, is calling on India, to send an envoy backed by its military. However, at this stage, I don't think the intervention is likely to happen.
What interest does India have in the Maldives?
It's a neighbouring country, so it's of great importance. And they have, certainly Nasheed has reached out to the Indians to intervene. But I think it's important to remember that Yameen has actively courted investment from China and Saudi Arabia. So China accounts for, 22% of all tourism to the country. Maldives is only the second country in Asia to have a free trade agreement with China. Other than the Maldives, only Pakistan does. So in that respect, Sino-Maldivian relationships in some respects are stronger.
Do the Maldives have any strategic importance for India?
I think they do have strategic importance for India because they're a neighbouring country. And like with Sri Lanka, what they're not going to want is, increased Chinese influence around its own borders. So they're going to want to play a role. It's in their own stability and security interests to not have turmoil in the Maldives. But will that translate into direct action? I think it's too early to say that because there are other considerations at play at the moment.
What are those?
Well, one, what do the Maldivians actually want other than what Nasheed is calling for? There's been a little bit of a ping pong between Abdul Gayoom when he was president, then Nasheed, now Yameen, who's the half-brother of Gayoom. So I think in that respect, it's still an unfolding crisis. The Supreme Court has now revoked its call asking for political prisoners to be released. So I think the Indians will be assessing the situation. They'll be thinking through what backdoor diplomacy is needed or possible. What pressure can they leverage in a private way, and the safety of their citizens that may be either working there or living there before thinking through, to intervene or not.
Is India any way anxious about guarding its shipping routes?
Yeah, that would be a primary area of concern for them. They'd want to ensure that that isn't disrupted in any way. In Asia, there are many authoritarian governments, and other governments are unlikely to intervene, whether it's rule of law or restoring democracy, unless they feel their own interests are compromised or threatened in some way. So I think it's those sort of issues that India will want to look for. In what way are these developments within the Maldives likely to threaten its own kind of security or stability or economic interests? And that will then inform whether intervention is made or not.
Dr. Champa Patel from Chatham House. The Polish president, Andrzej Duda, has signed a controversial anti-defamation law that makes it a crime to accuse the Polish nation of co-responsibility for Nazi atrocities during the Second World War. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said he was disappointed by the move, and Israel said the law would prevent people from speaking the truth about Polish involvement in the persecution of Jews. Adam Easton reports from Warsaw.
I'm at a newsstand in central Warsaw, and I've just picked up some of the newspapers, and this story is dominating the front pages. The Gazeta Wyborcza newspaper on its front page says government war with the whole world. Rzeczpospolita on its front page says no compromise in sight.
Minister. Hello, dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
The Nazis conceived the Holocaust. Germans, not Poles, built and ran the concentration and death camps, and many Poles were killed in them. Poland's Deputy Foreign Minister Marek Magierowski says the law is needed to stop people blaming the Polish nation for German war crimes.
Unlike in other European countries, there was no collaborationist regime in Poland like the Vichy in France and many others. So we suffered a lot during the war. We must not forget that it was the Jewish people who suffered most. But on the other hand, it was the German occupiers and the German invaders who brought that calamity upon the Jewish people.
So this is a newspaper your column appeared in today.
Mm-hmm. And, not right here, there's somewhere. There it is. Right. Basically, I'm saying that the government has shot itself in the head, assuming it has one.
The Polish Jewish journalist Konstanty Gebert says the law is imprecise and dangerous. He's already testing its reach, deliberately incriminating himself in his newspaper column by writing that numerous members of the Polish nation were co-responsible for taking part in the extermination of the Jews.
As long as it is academic discourse, it's probably protected. This is what the law says. But if you write a newspaper article about it, you're no longer protected. If you're a high school teacher, you're no longer protected. If you're on a bus and you say that, you're no longer protected. People will be afraid.
Before one trip across enemy lines, resistance fighters told him that Jews were being murdered on a massive scale and smuggled him into the Warsaw Ghetto and a Polish death camp to see for himself.
That's former US President Obama, mistakenly using the phrase Polish death camp in a 2012 speech honouring Polish war hero Jan Karski, who tried to warn the Allies what was happening to the Jews. The regular usage of this phrase around the world is one reason why the Polish government has acted. At the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, I met the historian Michał Trembacz, who says individual Poles did take part in crimes against Jews, such as in the town of Jedwabne, where Poles, encouraged by the Gestapo, locked several hundred of their Jewish neighbours in a barn and burnt them to death. But this wasn't the Polish state.
The Polish state was not complicit at all. So we did not collaborate with the Germans at all. And the Poles as individuals, yeah, they did, on different levels. But it happened in all occupied Europe.
I'm outside the museum now, looking at the monument to the Jewish fighters who died trying to stop the Nazis murdering every last single inhabitant of the Warsaw Ghetto. The street is named after Irena Sendlerowa, one of the thousands of Poles who risked their lives to hide Jews from the Germans. The government wants the world to know about those heroes. Instead, the row has sparked a wave of anti-Semitic incidents against Poland's small Jewish community in Warsaw, as its head, Anna Hipczynska, explained.
Just today we had two incidents in front of the synagogue in Warsaw. And the first one was an older lady who came and started to offend verbally one of the community members, telling him in a very vulgar way that Jews should leave Poland. And the second incident were two men who basically tried to pollute the area of the synagogue. They wanted to pee. They were being told by one of the community members not to do it, and again a verbal fight, and at the end physical fight started.
The Polish government says it is astounded by Israel's hostility to the law. It insists the legislation will only be used against those who accuse the Polish nation or state, not individual Poles, for complicity in the Holocaust. But its critics say that the courts should not be involved in discussions of this part of Poland's history.
That report by Adam Easton in Warsaw. This is Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. If you miss any of the week's main events, you can always catch up with The World this week. It's available to download from our website. The wedding of Japan's Princess Mako to commoner Kei Komuro has been pushed back by 2 years. The two had been scheduled to become formally engaged at a traditional court ceremony next month, before their planned wedding in November. Our Asia-Pacific editor Michael Bristow told me more.
Palace officials are saying it's been postponed to allow the royal couple more time to prepare for their wedding. Now, you might think, well, November's quite a long way off, but the couple themselves maintain that they need a little bit more time. There's also a suggestion from the princess herself in a statement released through the imperial household that perhaps when the announcement of their wedding came last year, they'd been rushed into it because of speculation in the media about their possible wedding. She suggested that she needed more time to get used to the idea of getting married and prepare for married life afterwards. She also apologised for letting people down. Interestingly, though, she suggested that there were perhaps other reasons, suggesting that the two of them, they're both 26, were a little immature, they'd rushed into things, and perhaps they needed a little bit more time. So that perhaps suggests, I don't know, are they having second thoughts?
Yes, because there's been a recent magazine article suggesting that her fiancé's mother has been having financial difficulties, which wouldn't be good for the imperial family.
Yeah, the article you're referring to, I think, suggests that the education of the princess's fiancé was paid for by the mother who borrowed the money. There's some suggestions that she should pay it back. She thinks she shouldn't. That obviously is going to cloud the coming nuptials, and a number of imperial household sources have told Japanese media outlets that this has played a part and certainly will influence the decisions taking place about whether or when this wedding will take place. But you've got to remember that the Japanese imperial household is quite secretive. There's a distance between it and the public, so it's not going to be easy to actually get to the bottom of the real reasons for this postponement.
And it's facing quite a complicated year next year because the emperor is going to step down.
Indeed, and this is one of Princess Mako's reasons for perhaps delaying until 2020. Emperor Akihito suggested a couple of years ago that he was tired, he was ill, he wanted to step down from the throne. He's now been allowed to do so, but that's not until next year. She suggested in a statement that she didn't want that event and the ascension of Emperor Akihito's son to the throne to get in the way, her wedding to get into the way of those events. She wanted them out of the way before she got married.
Michael Bristow. US share prices have bounced back after a day of sharp fluctuations on the world stock markets. The Dow Jones closed more than 2% up after opening significantly lower. But investors appear to be concerned about the prospect of rising interest rates, which could cause people to pull money out of shares and into government bonds. Our correspondent Neda Tawfik is in New York.
Markets in London, Frankfurt and Paris had initial losses of up to 3%, and they were able to recover some ground. London's FTSE 100 closed down almost 200 points, or 2.6%. That was its biggest fall in more than 18 months. And earlier, Asia's indices as well, they recorded losses of about 5%. So, for example, Taiwan's main index lost 5%, its biggest slump since 2011, and Japan's Nikkei dived 4.7%, its worst fall since November of 2016. We had a very volatile day with very wild swings between negative and positive territory at the Dow. The Dow closed at it closed up 2.3%. But just to give you a sense of how volatile the day was, trading opened with the Dow plunging 2.7%. It actually went into what is considered correction territory, which is a drop of 10% from a recent high. It gained ground, it lost ground, and this kind of trend went on all day. And between the highs and lows, the Dow traded in a 1,000-point range, so extremely volatile. And traders were telling me that they expect this actually to last for possibly a few weeks. They say that this could be the new normal for now, but that it's healthy and it's a natural kind of healthy correction to the market.
Neda Tawfik in New York. Now for a tale of sporting endeavour. The Brazilian jockey Jorge Ricardo may not be a household name, but he's just equalled an impressive world record. Charlotte Gallagher takes up the story.
It was a moment Jorge Ricardo had been working towards for years, and one he'll never forget. The win at Rio de Janeiro's Hippodromo racetrack gave the jockey his 12,844th win and equalled the world record set by his longtime rival, Russell Bayes. Ricardo, who's now 56, has been competing for the past 41 years. He broke down in tears after he crossed the finish line and said he was overcome by the achievement.
It's the most wonderful moment of my life, winning 12,844 races in my life. I've never imagined I would win so many.
Russell Bayes has now retired, meaning Jorge Ricardo, who's nicknamed Ricardinho, will likely break the world record this year. But success comes at a price. Ricardo has broken multiple bones throughout his career and says he's only ever taken 2 weeks' holiday. His life, he says, has always been about horse racing.
Charlotte Gallagher. How about this for an extreme walking holiday? Lucy Barnard is 1 year into her attempt to walk the length of the world. Her journey, which started in southern Argentina, will cover 30,000 kilometres across 15 countries and end at the highest point of Alaska. Miss Barnard has just reached the town of Concepcion in central Chile, and she took time out to speak to the BBC's Lucy Hawkins. So what have been her greatest challenges so far?
Getting through a week where I was really sick and all my gear broke was difficult, but also finding a routine and getting past the loneliness and managing how to take care of myself while I'm on my own and I don't have people that I can access easily to lean on when I need to.
Is that the most important thing, Lucy, finding your own rhythm?
Yeah, I think so. It's really difficult learning how to be in new environments all the time and being completely self-dependent.
It does beg the question, why are you doing this?
I just wanted to see how far I could get. I also learned that no woman had done it, so I felt like I should give it a go. And also I wanted to set an example to family and friends and other people that following along, that it doesn't matter how crazy your goals are in life. What's more important is just giving them a go than being successful.
What was the reaction when you told friends and family you were planning to do this?
Mixed, really mixed. So some people were behind me right away and other people just really hoped that it was a phase and that I'd grow out of it. But for the most part, everyone's been really supportive.
And what about the local people that you meet along the walk? Are they surprised to see you?
They really are, especially when I've crossed through areas that are super remote. You know, sometimes I wouldn't see anyone for maybe a week at a time. So at first they'd want to know if I'm actually there in front of them or not, and then ask me what I'm doing and am I lost and do I need help? And then when they realise I'm there on purpose, they think I'm a little bit crazy and then they think it's a really great journey.
How much longer is this going to take, this walk?
Possibly 4 or 5 years.
And you're ready for that mentally?
Yeah, I hope you are too, because that means we're going to be good friends.
You are, yeah. We'll keep following you, Lucy. We wish you the best of luck.
The BBC's Lucy Hawkins talking to the Australian walker Lucy Barnard. Tuesday marked the centenary of the Representation of the People Act here in the UK. It gave some women the vote and paved the way for universal suffrage. For decades, the suffragettes had campaigned to gain voting rights for women. Michelle Hussain looks at their achievements.
Ethel Smythe and March of the Women, the song she composed in 1910 as an anthem for the suffrage movement. By then, there was frustration that the campaign begun by Millicent Fawcett and the suffragists hadn't delivered votes for women. Here's how Pathé News, reporting in 1930, looked back on that time.
The women's movement had begun during Victoria's reign, but she herself had always been opposed to this mad, wicked folly of women's rights. With the passing of the Queen, the Victorian age was dead, but Victorian attitudes continued.
I never approved of women having to vote. And I always felt that when women began to call themselves equal with men, that they'd step down into the arena.
Frustration with the lack of progress on the vote sparked the rise of the suffragettes, led by Emmeline Pankhurst, and prepared to use more extreme tactics. Christabel Pankhurst, Emmeline's daughter, speaking in 1908.
The reasons why women should have the vote are obvious to every fair-minded person. The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
In a BBC interview in 1953, Emmeline's other daughter, Sylvia, who formed her own suffragette movement, reflected on their mother's struggle.
Processions of women marched to Parliament to present petitions to the Prime Minister. In the course of these demonstrations, 1,000 women were arrested after suffering very great violence, the order being only to make arrests when every possible effort had been exerted to drive the women petitioners away.
In a huge, brilliantly organised parade, over 600 militants dressed in white held arrows proudly aloft as a symbol of their imprisonment for the cause. Many had endured hunger strikes and forced feeding. The Morning Post observed it was a most striking exhibition of faith and strength.
The movement cut across the class divide in British society, bringing together women from different backgrounds. Jessie Stephen organised a union for domestic servants.
I was a parlourmaid. The conditions were so bad. Girls were only getting a matter of 10 shillings a month. And this sort of thing really got me going. I felt I had to do something like this.
In protest after protest, the suffragettes looked for new ways to capture people's attention. Muriel Matters-Potter was one of them.
I had already won my spurs by chaining myself to the grille of the Ladies' Gallery in the House of Commons. As a result of this, I was entrusted with the aerial demonstration on the day of the opening of Parliament. It was quite a little airship, 80 feet long, and written in large letters on the gas bag were 3 words: Votes for Women.
It was the First World War that brought decisive change, with a new value placed on the work and the contribution of women. Adeline Bourne was the founder of the Actresses Franchise League.
Never forget that Mrs. Pankhurst and Christabel never said they were better than men, because I think they are better. Dear creatures.
Report by Michelle Hussain. And that's all from us for now. An updated version of the Global News podcast will be available to download later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.